when the mitochondria doesn't work optimally, then the places it will show up in is whatever happens to be the weakest link for you.
Welcome to the Rejuvenate podcast. I'm your host, Krissy Hawks, and I am here with my co-host, Elwin Robinson. And today we are talking about some of the most difficult toxins to deal with. So Elwin, I want to hand this over to you. Why did you want to bring this up today?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'm not sure when we're releasing this, but we recently filmed the episode on detoxification and how incredibly important it is. And I gave some, from my perspective, very good general advice based on that understanding. But I wanted to cover the toxins, or at least some of the toxins, which are the most difficult to deal with. And I'm going to pick a middle ground here. I'm not going to pick the ones that are impossible to deal with, that some people worry about, like EMFs all around us, for instance, because, like the advice is going to be live in the middle of nowhere away from electricity. People are not going to do that, right? Or with chemtrails, the only way you can really avoid them is to live in the southern hemisphere for whatever reason. There's way more of them in the northern hemisphere. So I'm not going to talk about that stuff, but I also don't want to talk about the stuff that's actually really easy to deal with, where basically all you need to do is stop doing it and your body can actually really quickly recover. So one example of this is, alcohol and most, although not all drugs. Right? If you just stop, then after a few days to a few weeks, your body is, can recover from a significant degree. It does depend. There are a few exceptions. Cannabis stays in the system a lot longer because it's fat soluble. With smoking, because it's literally covering your lungs in tar and including all kinds of chemicals, including heavy metals, which we will talk about. That can be a bit more of a challenge as well. But a lot of the time, a lot of things are, you just got to stop and before long, you're okay again. One of the things that's in that category that people do often think about is actually pesticides, even something like glyphosate or Roundup, which is super toxic, really, really bad for you. But if you go to, like there's been studies on this, if you go to eating 100% glyphosate-free diet, like an organic diet, within a couple of weeks, it's out of your system. So it's not actually that hard to deal with. And so the point of all these videos is, I'm probably going to tell you some stuff you already know, but the point of these videos is to largely share with you stuff that you don't really know, or at least within the context you don't already know. So I wouldn't want to do a video, maybe I will do at some point, but at least these videos, if you're you, Krissy, I don't want to do a video where we just talk about all the stuff everyone already knows, Don't smoke or minimize how much you smoke. Don't drink and minimize how much you drink. Don't, eat foods that have a load of ingredients in that sound like chemicals that you don't know what they are. Same thing with skincare products, all of that kind of stuff. And maybe we will do that kind of at some point, and we'll talk about the details that people don't know. But I wanted to focus more on the stuff that's difficult to deal with, because I feel like the people who are going to end up being largely our audience for this are either going to be people who this is their job, maybe like helping people, or they're going to be people who have tried all the normal stuff and it hasn't been enough for them, and so they want to know the advanced stuff. So either way, that's really what I want to share about in this episode. So we'll see how many we get through in the episode, but what they all will have in common, the things that I want to focus on, is their tendency, first of all, for the body to hold on to them, for them to be difficult for your body to excrete, and generally they're fat soluble. So just like with vitamins, people watching this may know this distinction that water-soluble vitamins like B vitamins and vitamin C, vitamins, get flushed out of the system very quickly. So that's why you can take like a massive overdose, 10, 100 times the RDA of most of those without any issues in most cases. They're generally recognized as safe even by, the governing bodies who have a bias against these things. But the fat-soluble vitamins are legitimately actually not safe if you have a large dose for too long. Really, all of them other than vitamin K2. That's the only one that there's no evidence for yet. In fact, I've been looking into this. There's some evidence that even taking 100 times the usual amount is effective. That research comes from Japan. So, but that's the only one. And I think that's like quite an anomaly, but all the rest of them, you absolutely can have too much. And the difference between enough and too much is not actually that big. And that's because with fat soluble things, they build up over time. So only slightly too much every day is no problem for a day, a week, a month, a year, or even a decade. But at some point after a decade or several decades, it gets to a point where it is highly toxic and highly damaging to the system in various different ways. We will do an episode on toxic vitamins and minerals maybe as well, but certainly vitamins at some point. I have that planned. We talk about that, Krissy, but we won't cover that in this episode. And that's the other thing that I want to talk about. The things that I want to cover today are all things which are irredeemable. So basically, they have no value. We talked about this in the episode on detoxification, how with most things, the difference between it being a medicine or a poison is dosage, to quote Paracelsus. And that's true for most things that you can have. And I said, in some cases, people say, oh, alcohol's not a poison. It's fine. It's great. It's beneficial. I said, okay, that's fine if you believe that. But there must be some amount where you recognize that it is a poison, right? Is it 10 units a day or, whatever it may be for you. And so that's true for most things, right? Almost everything, even water, or salt, there is an amount at which it is poisonous. For the things I want to talk about today, these are things that I feel have no value at all at any level. Now, if we get to it, the last one, that'll be a bit more questionable and that'll be a bit more controversial. But the rest of them, I think it's not controversial. It's like everyone agrees on it. So these are the things that are irredeemable. They have no value. They're really hard for your body to process. They're very easy for your body to store. And then they create more and more problems in your body as you store them. So they're very important when I'm working with people who a lot of other stuff doesn't help, or the usual diet, lifestyle, supplement path. That's and also the medical results. The doctor says there's nothing wrong. It's all in your head or whatever. Then I'll often want to look for these specific toxins as the hidden culprit. And I'm not alone. Many other nutritionists, functional medicine doctors, naturopaths, and also some more broad-minded medical doctors will do this too.
Wonderful, Elwin. I think the first one that we've got up on the chopping block as we are here today as we're working through these is mycotoxins, and really looking at these and, why are these so toxic to our bodies?
Well, why is one of those big questions that, we're talking about evolution made them that way, God made them that way. It's kind of hard to answer without a fundamental assessment of who made the world and why and all that kind of thing. But if we're talking about how they are so toxic, well, let's look at molds for a second first, right? So molds are not appealing to anyone, I don't think. I don't think there's anyone who relishes the idea of finding mold anywhere, whether it's in their sandwich or on their walls or whatever. I would say mold is probably one of the most ancient kind of like aversions that we might have. That's like let me get away from that. Whereas a lot of things are hidden and invisible, right? Like if someone has a virus, you often can't tell, except for maybe the symptoms it's giving the person or whatever. Or if a room is full of bacteria, you often have no idea, right? But with mold, it's a very noticeably and unpleasant thing. And mold in itself can cause some damage to you directly. So the mold itself, it does colonize, right? It finds an area to habitate and then proliferates. It tends to prefer somewhere damp, and that can include the body. So it can happen inside your sinus cavities, which are actually quite large. They're bigger than we think. They're not just like a little bit here. They're actually like all over. And it can happen in our lungs as well through us breathing them in. They don't really seem to colonize the digestive tract in the same way. Other things do, yeasts like Candida, different bacteria, viruses even, but molds themselves don't seem to colonize in the digestive tract, but they can still cause problems if they're digested. So the two main ways that you would take a mold in are what I just said. You're either going to breathe it in or you're going to consume it. You're going to eat it, drink it. It can technically come in through the skin as well. Sorry, not mold itself can't come in through the skin. I'll get to the other thing. But yeah, it can interact with the skin in a negative way, but that would still be respiration technically. So it's either respiration or ingestion. So yeah, as you said, mycotoxins. Mycotoxins are really the issue. And so this is actually true of a lot more things than we think. So like everything else that I'm going to be listing is not a living organism, never has been. But, you know, a mold is a living organism. A mycotoxin is not. So a mycotoxin is created by a mold. Mold is the organism. Mycotoxin is this biochemical warfare agent that it creates. It's no different from sarin gas, mustard gas, like the way that human armies will use chemical weapons to poison each other, their enemies, and all the rest of it, depleted uranium, all that kind of stuff. We are not the first species on this planet to think of that. Like all of the microorganisms, possibly excepting viruses, but bacteria, yeast, fungi, molds, they are all battling each other to various degrees. They all release toxins, sometimes which supports each other, sometimes which fights each other. There's a whole political ecosystem going on between these organisms and shifting alliances. It's like a little Game of Thrones going on inside us and around us all the time. But basically, it's a chemical warfare agent. And if that sounds dramatic, it's not overstating how bad it is. So mycotoxins are... by the UK government standards, they're classed in the same category as asbestos in terms of how toxic they are and how important it is to remove them from a house. I'll talk more about that in a second, but to start with, just introducing them. So they are highly toxic, and they can either come in through the lungs, like I talked. Now, I said you can breathe in mold spores, and they will not pass the barrier into the bloodstream. So they can colonize the sinuses, sometimes even the lungs, but mold itself will not get into your bloodstream because they're too big. They don't go past that membrane. But mycotoxins are way, way, way smaller. Mycotoxins are so small that they can absolutely penetrate through the lungs or the sinuses straight into the bloodstream. They can also penetrate through the intestinal tract straight into the bloodstream. And they're so small, they can pass through walls, for instance.
Exactly, you know, because I know we breathe it in, with the exposure essentially is either us breathing it in or ingesting it, but how are we contaminated, or the things that we're eating or the things that we're breathing in, how are those areas contaminated with these things?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in terms of food seems to not be the major issue unless you're very unlucky in terms of the exposure that you get, or unless you have a tendency to not handle it well, which can be because your body is so challenged with dealing with other things. It's like yet another thing that it has to deal with that pushes it over the edge, or that you have a genetic tendency to not be able to process it as well. And yes, Genetic Insights, we do have a report on that will tell you if you have that genetic tendency to not be able to process it as well, both airborne and food sourced. We have one report on each, because some people, they have an issue with one, but not the other. So if you have an issue with it that way, food can be an issue. How does it get in food? Generally, it's in like grains, nuts, beans. It's for the reason that you think that it's food that's been sitting around for a long time, basically, especially if it's in a damp environment and mold gets a chance to proliferate. A lot of stuff that we eat these days, because of the advantages in storage techniques and stuff like that compared to, relatively recent in our history, is very old. So if you buy like flour, for instance, gluten-free or not, it could be like 2 years old by the time you're having it, and mold can form basically. Grains are very common. When I say beans, coffee is a specific one. The whole bulletproof coffee trends that went crazy that I'm not a huge fan of, but one of the things I do like about what the creator of that says is to avoid mold in food. And if you buy food, to buy a mold-free version of that food. So I believe that's what bulletproof coffee is. That's why it's whatever it is, 5 or 10 times the price, because it's tested for mold and guaranteed mold-free. True or not, I can't say, but let's assume yes, for argument's sake. So there is that value in not having mold in food, and that's the whole thing about having food as fresh as possible. This is a cultural thing that in some parts of the world, they still absolutely have. So China is a good example of this. In China, everything they eat is fresh, as in a few days old in most cases. Okay, they don't manage that with rice, but as the animals, the plants that they eat, they're like literally a few days old. Now, I've seen that sometimes they're like literally growing next to like a chemical plant where there's like massive amounts of poison going into them. They're not as aware of that. So we would say that's crazy. You're eating food that's, literally growing at the chemical plant, but they would go, you're crazy. You're eating food and all of it is like months or years old. And they're not actually any more wrong than us. Like both of those things are actually crazy if you really think about it. And for different reasons, right? So the way that we store food for a long time, the fact that we store food for a long time, the way that it's stored, the fact that there isn't enough care put into this, a lot of people would say, ultimately it's down to the government to make sure that the food is safe. And we could argue that the levels that are allowed of mycotoxins are way higher than would ideally be the case. This will be a theme for all the toxins we talk about. And then also that it's not very strictly enforced, right? Which is why it's really down to the consumer. If you want to have mold-free diet, then you got to search for companies that you trust who have or who can show that they have tested for mold and that the product is actually free of mold. However, having said all that, I'm not super uptight about that because, as I said, generally, food is not the major issue. The major issue usually is the other type. It's airborne mold. That's what really ruins the quality of someone's life. And the reason why is very simple. So yes, obviously, if you're in one of those houses like the Hoarders series and there's junk and filth piled up everywhere and you actually see mold growing everywhere, obviously that's going to be an issue. However, the issue that is more common is that actually that's not the case. The person has a perfectly tidy home, perfectly clean, and often doesn't have any or hardly any visible mold, and therefore assumes that there is no problem. And the issue is actually that it is either in the attic, or it's in the basement, or it's even in between the walls. Quite often walls have cavities, right? It's not just, one solid thing. There's a space in between. And as I explained earlier, are mold spores getting from, the basement up to your room, if you're above a basement, for instance? No. But can mycotoxins? Yes, absolutely. And a lot of them. Now, mold creates all kinds of toxins. Mycotoxins aren't the only type. It also creates volatile organic compounds and various different gases, some of which you can smell. So that common musty smell that people associate with mold, a lot of people will come into a room and like, can't smell any mold. There isn't any mold. Technically may be true if they've got a good sense of smell, but that doesn't mean that there isn't any mycotoxins. That's the distinction. And there actually could be a lot of mycotoxins. Mycotoxins have no smell. There's no way to perceive them with your senses. Testing would be the only way to do it. And so this again and again is where you see people, and I think this has become quite a big trend in the alternative health space. And I think sometimes it's possible to think, well, there's a real epidemic of people suffering with this, but I'm not 100% sure. Obviously, the mainstream medical establishment would not agree. They would say it's relatively rare and uncommon. What I think it is that most people who end up going to functional medicine doctors and all the rest of it have already tried a lot of other stuff. They've already tried their mainstream. And so a lot of them who end up seeing those people do have a mold problem because they've already tried the usual stuff. They've already tried changing their diet. They've already tried exercise. They've already tried herbs and supplements. They've already tried, doing their own cleanses at home. They've already tried all that stuff and they're not getting better. Maybe they're getting worse. And then they go to this alternative type of doctor. And then often they find that mold is the issue. So it's not necessarily super, super common that it is the issue. But is it commonly a thing that is negatively impacting your health? That really depends. It depends on where you live, obviously, as I'm talking about this being a house infestation issue. If you live in a damp climate, it is more likely. But I've heard of people having this issue in like Arizona and places like that. So it is not only that, because even if your environment is really dry, like as in outside, if your house is old and not well built and at some point there was a leak, this is the thing. Like when we got our house, I was like, has there ever been a leak? and the person I bought it from built it himself. He was very, very, fastidious about maintaining it to a basic standard of not letting anything like a slip roof tile or anything turn into something more. And and it was pretty clear. I would be surprised if he wasn't telling the truth about that. It really seemed well maintained, and there was no signs of mold of any kind. But that's relatively rare that you're in that position and that you prioritize that stuff, I guess, like I did. Most of the time we buy stuff, it doesn't even occur to us to ask, or if it does, we may be deceived, or probably more commonly the person selling it has no idea. And so there may have been a situation at one point where there was a flood, where there was a damp, where there was a leak. And now, underneath the floorboards, right, it's wet. How do you dry that space underneath the floorboard? You can't really, right? Damp proliferates and now it's poisoning you. Now, does it poison everyone? That's the other thing. You could say, well, I feel really sick in this house. My daughter feels really sick in this house, but my wife and my son are fine. So it can't be mold, right? But no, there are a few things that affect that. Number one is genetics, like I talked about. And the other one is based on what your body's already dealing with. And we talked about those factors in the detoxification episode, right? Depending on how far along you are in the process of cholestasis and being saturated with toxins, makes a significant difference as well.
I was going to ask, because now that we've just talked about how we essentially get exposed or things like that, and then also too, whether our genetics or our body's ability to detoxify, how that will affect us. Can you speak to what the signs and symptoms of or are for somebody that potentially has been exposed?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I won't list all the signs and symptoms. We'll put a link there, Krissy, for people who want to check it properly. But basically, the signs and symptoms, like many of these health things, are like everything. Any health problem under the sun, you name it, it could be caused by mold toxicity. And so this is, the same with Lyme's disease, same with heavy metal toxicity, same with hypothyroidism for that matter, which we talked about in a previous episode. There are, unfortunately, but everything that I just said has something in common. I'm not being flippant. So one of the big challenges with mycotoxicity is that it attacks, and that's maybe a dramatic way of putting it, but it significantly reduces the efficient and effective functioning of the mitochondria. The mitochondria being the thing that creates cellular energy, that creates ATP. So the reason why the list of things that can go wrong are the same almost with mycotoxins or heavy metal toxicity or an underactive thyroid, or in fact, an excess of polyunsaturated fatty acids, which we might get to later, or some other herpes virus. What's the one that is really debilitating. I can't remember. It'll come to me later. But there's a few like that. And they all have a significant impact on mitochondrial functioning and metabolism. And as a result of that, as we talked about already in detail in the thyroid episode and in the metabolism episode, so I won't go through it again, but every system of the body is completely dependent on that ATP being sufficient. And so when there is not enough because it's been because the functioning of it has been reduced by some kind of toxin or the toxins coming from some kind of infectious agents, then a person will often, it's hard to tell the symptoms apart. Having said that, there are a couple of things that a seasoned practitioner will use to, because you still, as a practitioner, often you have limited funds for testing, so you've got to kind of guess at least where to start with testing. And so some of the signs that I've come across and heard of that indicate that you should maybe start with it are neurological issues, and a particularly weird one, but one frequently experienced by people is getting static shocks. So if you frequently get static shocks all the time, like way more commonly than other people, that's a classic sign of mold toxicity. Now, this is not, again, super mainstream, but what the guy who really discovered that mold toxicity was an issue wasn't that long ago, only 20 years ago. Name on the tip of my tongue, again, maybe it'll come to me. But he created a diagnosis for this called CIRS, C-I-R-S, which is chronic inflammatory response syndrome. And so talking about symptoms, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, what that means on a theoretical level is that your body has an inflammatory response to everything, right? Hence the word chronic. And if everything is an exaggeration, then way more than it should, like a huge gamut of things, which a normal, healthy person would not have an inflammatory reaction to. And so that's the other thing I think that we look for when we suspect mold toxicity. So neurological issues, just to go back to that, numbness, tingling, not being able to think clearly. Again, those can be heavy metals as well, but it's definitely an indication for it. But this chronic inflammatory response thing is basically when you have a client, or if you are that person, and almost everything that you recommend to them that should help them feel better makes them actually feel worse, then that is an interesting indication. It's still not a guarantee that it is mold, but it is because it could happen with certain heavy metals and certain other things, but it is a good indicator that might be what you're dealing with. And so in that case, it's tricky, and people with mold are often some of the hardest people to help, or to help yourself if you have it, because not only do you have to deal with, I've got this toxin, how do I get it out? But you've also got to deal with almost everything that I'm in contact with, I have a bad reaction to. And this could be, allergy to things you wear, to things you breathe in, to food. It could be to supplements, to herbs, to radiation of various kinds, to sunlight, to, it could be, get out in the sun, that's good for you. Maybe not, or, drink fruit juice, drink fresh orange juice, it's good for you, maybe not, or get some fresh air. I've just breathed in a load of pollen and now I'm reacting to it, maybe not, So it's like, it could be very frustrating to the person who wants to help, or obviously needs to be helped, that so many things that they try actually make them feel worse. And in fact, it can lead them down a rabbit hole. If you're someone who's gone down a rabbit hole of, oh my God, this is bad for me, that is bad for me, everything's bad for me, kind of, you're not wrong in a way. Like, we are absolutely surrounded by toxicity and things that are bad for us. But on the other hand, it's not that different from, walking around a big city and going, oh, this person might be trying to kill me, this person might be trying to kill me, this person might be trying to rob me. Again, you might be right, depending on the city, right? But at some point, you just got to live your life, But it just, be cautious, but don't, proceed not as if everyone is necessarily trying to kill you. But that's easy advice to give, like, oh, chill out, man, it's not that toxic. But of course, if your body's having a reaction, your body's having a reaction. There's not a lot you can do about it. It's true that calming down your nervous system and filling yourself with positive feelings often does help to various degrees, but nonetheless, that chronic inflammatory reaction has to be addressed at the root as well. So in terms of how to address that, let's probably, if I don't cover it until then, let's cover it at the end, because it's actually something that does apply to all of the toxins that we'll talk about.
Okay, no, that's good. I was going to ask as well, if somebody suspects that they have been exposed, how can they get a reliable test, or how can they test to see if this is the case?
So internal or external? So in terms of testing yourself, the only thing that I know of is urine tests. So they will test what you're excreting. So that excretion process, it does happen through the stool as well as the kidneys. So it happens through the liver intestinal channel that we talked about a lot in the detox episode, but it does also happen through the blood kidney channel. Anyway, the test that is done is the kidney one, the urine one. I think it's fairly reliable. I think, again, as I said, this is something that was only discovered to be a real issue about, I think, less than 20 years ago. And I think the testing has only been available for a few years. What I'll do, Krissy, I'll give you a link to some of what I would consider the leading mold experts. And I would suggest, looking at their work to keep up to date with what might be the latest thing. Because obviously I'm not an expert, right? I'm a generalist. There are some people who are specifically focused on this. This is all they do. But as I said, as far as I know, still the urine test is the way you test it internally. Now, in terms of your house, because we talked, or your environment, because it's not just your house, it could be your workplace or anywhere that you spend a lot of time. There are mold tests, and then there are mycotoxin tests as well. I don't know if the mycotoxin tests are considered to be 100% reliable, but I know that the mold ones certainly are. Now, if you're like, well, what use is that then? It's some use, because if they do every room in the house, including things like the basement and the attic, like rooms that you don't normally go into, then it doesn't deal with the between wall or behind wall issue, whatever. But it's usually you'll see it somewhere if you do actually have it. And so it won't just be a positive or a minus, a good test. It will also tell you the level, right? And so you can see, like, is it very high or not? I can recommend a company in the UK that I used personally. I'll ask me for a link for that, Krissy, that not only will test, but will also treat the mold. I don't know if you're going to ask me about that next in the house. And I believe that the technology that they use is available in the US as well. I haven't looked into it, but I'm pretty sure that it is. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was developed in the US in the first place.
So, Elwin, when I was looking this up and researching it, I did find a quote from the internet from quite a good, I would think it was, Healthline. I definitely go there for some information and some research. And the quote said, "As for a mold detox, contrary to some beliefs, there's typically no need to go on a cleanse or detox in order to heal your body after exposure to mold." And they say, here's why. When functioning optimally, your body constantly detoxes itself, and it's very efficient at this task. So can you speak to this?
I love it. Well, they gave the game away there with that second sentence, right? When functioning optimally. Well, let me address it first of all. Okay, so first of all, there's not really such a thing as a mold detox. If it's mold, then you actually need to kill it. So it's more of a what was the word? Anti-mold program, there's certain nasal sprays, for instance, you can take to, like, with grapeseed extract and stuff like that, to kill the mold spores in your nose. But that's not a detox. That's a killing thing. And then the thing that you detox is the mycotoxins, not the mold. So again, the quote is technically correct, although misleading, perhaps, but technically correct. You do not do a mold detox. There's no such thing. You do a mold kill and a mycotoxin detox. I guess maybe they meant a mycotoxin detox, although I don't know. But let me progress and, give them what they call it, steel man their argument, and let me assume it's as sound as possible, and let me address it from that perspective. So it is the case, first of all, that it's kind of pointless doing a detox of mold if you are still swimming in it, metaphorically. So you have to deal with the source of exposure. That's one of the unfortunate cases. All the mold experts that, I'll give you links to, they all agree on that. You have to deal with the exposure. That's why mold is not a popular one, because it's one of those things where, if it's in your house, what are you going to do? You're going to move, you're going to, especially if you own the house, you're going to start knocking down walls to try and find mold, or pulling up floorboards. It just sounds like a nightmare, and it is doing that stuff. It's called mold remediation. There is a term for it. There are people who specialize in it. There are companies who specialize in doing it. It absolutely is the thing. The thing that I found, they were able to address it without knocking down walls and pulling up floorboards. They basically go and they spray with this totally natural substance. I think it's just acetic acid, which is vinegar. They go and spray and they kill it everywhere in this fine mist. And then they go and apply another spray, which is like a coating that stops it coming in. But again, they would say you have to deal with the source of it. So if you have a leak, you can do their treatment and it will have some degree of helpfulness. But as soon as that leak makes that wall or whatever damp enough, then the mold will just come back again. So you have to deal with the source of the damp. Then, you have to either, as I say, knock down walls and stuff like that, or do some kind of process like that, which was not cheap. But then again, I did it for this ridiculously big house I was living in at the time. It's not super expensive if you're in a normal size house at all. But it doesn't last forever. I think yearly is something you need to do if you're going to carry on having that exposure. Technically, I guess if you're on top of it now and you make sure that, there are no leaks of any kind, then you wouldn't need to do it, as long as that was the case and you're on top of it. So that's remediation. That has to be done. So again, the idea mold detoxes don't work. It'd be very easy to say that's an accurate conclusion if it's done by someone who didn't resolve the source of contamination. So you have to deal with the source of contamination. Now, the last thing, as I said, it was given away in the symptoms. If the body is functioning optimally, is your body functioning optimally? I mean, it's mine, you, the listener, the viewer. If it is, congratulations, right? And again, I don't know, what order we'll release this in, but I think it will already be out. We talked about testing, the value of testing, a lot of the different tests that I would personally recommend. Do not assume that you are functioning optimally unless you do that testing, right? Because people can think that they're fine and then suddenly drop dead. Happens all the time, especially in the case of cardiovascular disease, right? With cardiovascular disease, there are no symptoms. There is just, I'm fine. I just had a heart attack. And that's why you have to test. That's not the only thing that's the case for, but it is one example, right? So what's that got to do with this? Basically, I'm saying most of us are not optimal in this day and age. Most of us are overloaded toxicity. We talked about that in the detox episode already a lot. So everything they're saying is technically true. There's no such thing as a mold detox. It doesn't really help because it doesn't exist. And if the body's functioning optimally, you don't need it. All of that is true, but it's missing some crucial context.
Yeah, there's a lot to it. It's an understatement, I think. Let me ask you this. We mentioned it earlier about an individual's genetics. Can you speak a little bit more about, how an individual's genetics and the exposure to these mycotoxins and what that would look like and the impact it would have on that person? Yeah,
basically, there's a few key genes, which I won't go into, which are essential for each of these things. I was going to say, we're not doing super in depth with this one. If people are into it, I'll happily do, an episode just on mycotoxins. I'll happily do an episode just on mercury, just on lead, whatever. But I want to keep this one brief so we cover a few different things. But there are a few key genes that can work fast slow, or normal, right? This is actually true for all of the genes. We talked about a few examples of that before, like the COMP gene that breaks down stress chemicals. So just like that, and often it's not just on a scale where everyone is different. It is a case of if you have one variation, it's fast. If you have another variation, it's slow. And so for those of us who have especially more than one variation, that means we are slow at processing a specific chemical. And that doesn't even have to just be a mycotoxin. That could be, your body rarely goes, as we talked about in the detox episode, it rarely goes from toxin out. It often is like toxin, turn it into something more toxic, turn it into something more toxic, turn it into something less toxic, and then eventually out. It's something like that. It's some kind of sequence like that. And so if any of those processes, especially once it's more toxic, breaking it down to something less toxic, if that process is not working well because of genes or other factors like the gene being overloaded or under fueled with the right nutrition, I guess those are the two most common issues, then a person can have issues where another person is totally fine in exactly the same environment.
And then when somebody has been exposed, they know it, they've tested it, they've got all of this, and they're potentially either working with somebody or they're trying to heal from it. Can individuals actually heal from something like this? And roughly, how long would that process take?
Yes. Like the people who guide people on this, love to answer that second part of the question with how long is a piece of string. Like it totally depends on your body's capacity, on how exposed you've been, for how long, all of that kind of stuff. But usually it's kind of a long haul process. For all of the toxins we'll talk about today, it's not going to be a day, it's not going to be a week, it's not a fast, it's not a juice cleanse. It is something that's going to take many months and possibly even several years. So we're talking, 6 months probably as a minimum. Why? Is this just arbitrary numbers? But surely if you only have a little bit, it isn't going to take that long. Well, maybe. But the thing is, again, that it's fat soluble. So that means it's stored in the fat, and that means that the turnaround time is a lot slower than if it were water soluble. So it just takes a while. And that's kind of a good thing. If your body released it all at once, you would feel so incredibly ill. And a lot of the game with detoxification with this stuff is, so it's kind of several stages to it. I suppose we can talk about this now because it's actually the same with heavy metals that we're going to talk about next, probably. The stages are basically, and don't do them in this order, but this is kind of an order to think about it in. So there's agitate, there is process, and then there is remove. So we talked a lot about process and remove in the detox episode. So processing is done in the liver primarily, also to some degree in the lymph, also to a significant degree in the kidneys, also kind of a bit in the thyroid, depending on how you view it. But basically liver is the most important one. And then removing is done via the large intestine, it's done via the skin, it's done via the lungs, and it's done via the bladder. So that's it. Now, the agitate is done on a way, way, way more microscopic level. That's done on a cellular level. So this is, often the upregulation of certain genes, like NRF2 is a big one that one of the people I like to learn from on this subject, called Dr. Christopher Shades, talks about a lot. As you increase the activity of NRF2, more and more toxicity will come out of storage in the cells, especially fat cells, and be put into the bloodstream, ready for processing. A lot of things that are supposed to be good for you and detox you are agitators. And therefore, this is one of the reasons why a lot of the things that are supposed to be healthy make people with all of these toxicity problems we're talking about today feel worse. I won't even get into substances, just sunlight, exercise, increased heart rate, being hot, like saunas, etc., being cold, like these basic things that actually are all beneficial will, increasing metabolism, which we talked about in a previous episode. All these things are beneficial, all these things are great in theory, and they are great in reality, but they also speed up the release of toxicity from storage into the bloodstream. Remember, once it's in your bloodstream, it can go to your brain. It can go into your nervous system. It can go into every other organ of the body. It'll be affecting your immune system because your immune system is constantly patrolling the blood. So, you know, the simple approach to detoxification that almost no one, well, maybe I'm exaggerating, but almost no one compared to what I would like teaches and understands is that if you have any of these issues, you really minimize the agitators for really a long time. The correct order is the opposite I just said. First of all, you focus on release. So if you're constipated, red card. Do not be agitating anything. If you have skin issues, that's a red card too. That means your skin is already overloaded with toxins, among other things. It could also be an infection. It could also be autoimmunity. It could be other issues as well. It could be nutritional deficiency, but it's not in its peak position to start kicking out more toxins. Let's put it that way. At the very least, often there is a toxic component to it. So making sure that you're sweating adequately, sweating when relaxed, sweating when you are exercising doesn't release toxicity in the same way. Your body's in a different mode, in a sympathetic mode. But Elwin, didn't you just say that sauna is an agitator? Yes. So that's where like infrared saunas, which make you sweat a lot with relatively low heat, that's one of the reasons why, or sometimes a hot sauna is great, but that's one reason why you would choose an infrared sauna that produces a lot of sweating with relatively low heat, because it's less agitating and more releasing. Making sure that you're breathing correctly. We'll talk about that at some point. And then, you know, not being dehydrated, although you don't want to overdo it with water either. And then the processing centers. I won't talk about that again because we talked about that in the detox episode. I already gave you a lot of guidance on that. If you want to hear more, we can do another episode. We can do it on the kidneys and whatnot. But that's plenty for now. And so I'd say get on top of all that first. If you have cholestasis, if you're constipated, if you have, as I say, skin issues, your pores are blocked, stuff like that, that's all a sign that you need to be dealing with that first before you start agitating more to be released. And the other part of it is that you need to, especially when the liver does most of the processing of these really toxic toxins, like we're talking about in this episode, and we want to be aware of intrahepatic circulation, which we explained properly in that episode. And we want to make sure that all the toxins aren't just being reabsorbed again straight away. So we want to be on top of binders. Now, on the subject of binders, I learned about binders through studying about mold toxicity. Everyone in the mold toxicity world recommends binders. The first person, still haven't got their name, we'll put it underneath, was a medical doctor. And so he recommended more of a medical drug called cholestyramine, I think. Which is a medical binder, and it binds bile, stops it being reabsorbed. If you have no idea what we're talking about, I won't repeat it all again. Please check out the other episode. And then those of us who are, can't, prescribe cholestyramine and or who want something safer, we look at other binders. And so I talked about my favorite binder in that detox episode, which is charcoal, but there are others. There is bentonite clay, there is zeolite, there is modified citrus pectin. I can't remember if I talked about these. And then there is various fibers, pectin being one of them. And so the interesting thing with that urine test that I talked about earlier is it won't just tell you have mycotoxins or how many mycotoxins. It also tells you which mycotoxins, because there are various mycotoxins with various different molds. Again, we can go through them all if we do a whole episode on this, but basically it'll say, you got levels of this mycotoxin, and therefore we recommend this binder, and this binder. So you can take a general binder that's generally helpful, like charcoal, but you can also take some specific binders that help with your specific type of toxins. And so that's, to me, the main benefit of doing the mycotoxin test. I don't think you have to do it, because the procedure for getting mycotoxins out is actually really good for getting a lot of the hard to deal with toxins out. So if you are wrong, that you have mycotoxin toxicity and you do the procedure, you'll probably feel better anyway, because all those symptoms that made you think you had mycotoxin toxicity are probably some other toxin, which will also be helped by that same process. Well, even if you're wrong, you don't even have a toxicity problem. Maybe you actually have a SIBO problem, but doing that procedure will really, really help to, reduce the amount of endotoxin and other toxic things in your gut. So like it's pretty much always a good idea. I know it sounds crazy to say, but it's pretty much always a good idea to do a mycotoxin detox protocol, even if you don't have mycotoxins. So I think the tests were quite expensive last time I looked. So if that is putting you off, I know I usually say I'm a big fan of testing. In this case, I don't think it is crucial. You can just do the procedure for, a few months. I said it can take years, but you should start to feel better, I would say, after, say, 3 to 6 months, something like that. At least some of your symptoms should be better in that time. And again, all this advice is always assuming that you've already been to a doctor and they already have not been able to help. I say that legitimately, not just as a disclaimer. You want to make sure there's not something acute going on that a doctor can help with. All this advice is, doctors told me there's nothing wrong with me, what else can I try, kind of stuff.
No, I think you pretty much covered it in that last section, because I was going to ask, what does a mycotoxin protocol look like to help an individual on the way? So would there be anything else that you would want to add to that?
Yes, but it's all stuff we've covered in previous episodes. It's stuff about helping the mitochondria work better that we've talked about. It's stuff about helping the hormones, maybe supplementally supporting them temporarily. Like some of the mycotoxins really mess with the hormonal system. Some of them really mess with the nervous system, like we talked about. So, there are various nutrients, but it's all the stuff I've recommended before. So yeah, all the stuff I've talked about in terms of metabolism and hormones and stress as well. Sometimes people have chronic pain, then you got to go to our chronic pain episode. It really depends what issues affect you. We've talked about this before, that when the mitochondria doesn't work optimally, then the places it will show up in is whatever happens to be the weakest link for you, both genetically and that time, right? So I said for me, my genetic reports say I'm top 1% most likely to have sinus issues. So if I'm not functioning optimally, if my mitochondria is not perfect, then I'm much more likely to have sinus issues than I am to be overweight or to have insulin resistance or ear infections or whatever, right? UTIs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like it shows up in me for one place. For you, it might be something else. For someone else, it might be the hair starts falling out. There could be so many different things, right? So wherever it affects you is where you want to focus on and follow the advice that I give. But otherwise, it's generally mitochondrial function and detoxification.
Perfect, Elwin. Yes, everyone, you can, we'll put links in the description to all the other previous episodes that Elwin has mentioned. So I do want to move on now, Elwin, to the heavy metals discussion. So can you give us what is heavy metal poisoning? Like, give us just a quick glimpse of what that is.
Yes. Okay. I'll be concise. I know we've got time today, especially. So, and I want to squeeze all this in. So, what are heavy metals? So there's the periodic table of elements, right? This is the, what's the word, theoretical answer. So I'll just give this quickly. And there are certain elements on there which are heavy. So they have a lot of mass. They have a lot of weight per mass, basically. So it's the idea of, what weighs more, a kilo of feathers or a kilo of lead. They're both the same, right? Because they're both a kilo. But what is going to take up less space? It's the lead, right? It's a very heavy element for the amount of space it takes up. So anyway, that's true for lead. It's actually not true of all the things that are classified as heavy metal. I believe arsenic is usually in the heavy metal category, but it's not really. But yeah, the ones that, there are actually loads, but the ones that are usually most commonly focused on are mercury, lead, arsenic, and cadmium. Zinc is technically a heavy metal, but is usually not treated as such because it's beneficial, but an excess of it is actually not good. I won't talk about that in this episode, but it's what's the word? It's a pro-oxidant as opposed to an antioxidant, and in excess, it's way too much. It's not good. It can prematurely age you. It's like rust, that's what happens when iron is oxidized. Molybdenum is a heavy metal, technically, but again, unless you have way too much of it, which is not commonly the case, it's actually a beneficial nutrient that helps with sulfur metabolism specifically. It's the number one thing that it's known for. Copper is a heavy metal. There is such a thing, or can be classed as heavy metal. Actually, I've seen different viewpoints on that. There is such a thing as too much copper. Wilson's disease is the medical condition. It's a very interesting one, where a person literally, it becomes indistinguishable from a psychopath. Their character completely changes. They have no empathy, no guilt, barely any fear, no remorse, completely predatory. And it's all just because they have too much copper. Take the copper away and they're completely normal again. They've got a conscience, they've got a heart, they care about people. Quite amazing. So that's an extreme of copper toxicity. There are milder versions of copper toxicity that are also not good. A bit disputed as to what level is toxicity other than the obvious Wilson's disease. So anyway, all right, Elwin, you're just complicating it. What's the real answer? I always hear these objections in my head. Well, I say that because to say, like, let's say molybdenum. Molybdenum really is a heavy metal, but we don't treat it as such, and ditto with iron, because it has value, but also because an excess is not that common, especially in the case of molybdenum. I think it's barely ever happened in the history of humanity. So the real thing that distinguishes a heavy metal is that in our history of humanity, loads of people have had too much, and it was really, really bad. That's the simple way of putting it. It's something that at some point, loads of humans have had way too much of it, and they got really, really sick, and many of them died. That's the simple explanation. And that's why, cadmium, mercury, lead, and arsenic are probably like the top ones that tend to be focused on. There's other ones like uranium, we talked about before, like radioactive waste and stuff like that. Even though you'd think that would be a major issue, we don't actually see that come up that often when we're testing people. So let's go through them. Probably the most famous heavy metal is mercury. I think everyone has heard of mercury poisoning pretty much. So mercury basically comes from two places primarily. It comes from seafood, and it comes from the fillings in our mouth. Generally, if a person has never had a mercury filling and they do not consume seafood or not very much, or maybe they're very careful with it because some seafood is way lower, like very small fish like sardines tend to be pretty low in it, anchovies. But other than that, it doesn't guarantee you have mercury toxicity, because everything that I said before about mold toxicity counts here. So some people can process it very well, some people not so much. Some people, that's genetic reasons. Some people, that's lack of other minerals, like people who are lower in zinc tend to have more of a problem with heavy metals. People who are lower in proteins, amino acids tend to have more of an issue with certain heavy metals. There's a few different factors, but those are these sources of exposure that are common. Mercury thermometers used to be a thing, but they don't really exist anymore. Mercury in industry still does happen, especially in some countries, but I mean, most of the industry is gone from, my country and your country these days, Krissy, let's face it. And there are obviously some, benefits to that, lots of drawbacks as well. And then, the other thing for mercury is environmental pollution, right? But again, because most of us are so isolated from the environment, that's not a huge source. So loads of it is being pumped into the rivers and all these bodies of water in the ocean. But because most of us do not have enough exposure to those things, it's not an issue unless we eat, say, fish that are swimming around it all day. And even then, as I said, it does depend which fish. Just to give an example of that, like a huge fish, like a shark, a swordfish, or a big tuna, will have literally 1,000 times as much mercury as like a sardine or an anchovy, which are very small fish. So it really is, especially if you eat big fish frequently, that you are more likely to have mercury poisoning. It absolutely does happen. It even happens to people who are super health conscious, whether it's Tony Robbins or Entourage's Jeremy Piven. two that I remember off the top of my head, people who had such bad mercury toxicity, and it was in the tabloids and whatnot, that they almost died, basically. That's what they both said. As a result of trying to eat healthy, that's the point. I remember seeing Jeremy Piven before in Air One, which is like a super trendy LA health place. And, I'm sure a lot of those people in those areas, while they may binge on bad things sometimes, a lot of them are into, a lot of health and fitness stuff. And Tony Robbins, that's certainly the case for him. So the fact that he almost died of heavy metal poisoning shows how much of an issue fish can be, especially excessive amounts of the big fish. Okay, so that's mercury. Lead.
Yeah, one of your faves.
Yeah. Lead is an interesting one. I still don't know how I got such high levels of lead. I talk about that in several episodes, probably the most detailed, the recent one we did on testing, that we filmed on testing. So lead can come from the water, if you have lead pipes. Lead can come from the food to some degree, supplements, herbs, especially from questionable sources, sometimes have that. When I say herbs, turmeric, I think, is the most famous example. I can't remember if it's Bangladesh or Pakistan. One of these countries, a lot of the turmeric, they were adding lead to it on purpose because it made it more yellow, more brightly yellow, something like that, or some version of lead made it more brightly yellow. And so there was a lot of lead poisoning for that reason. So occasionally added to food, occasionally on purpose. It's added to paint.
Yeah, that's the big one.
Yeah, paint. And that includes painting of, say, plates, right? Now, most places they use, there's this idea of, okay, we use it, but we kind of seal it, so none of it's going to leak out. Really the same argument they make about mercury in teeth. Oh, yeah, it's highly toxic, and oh, yeah, we put it in your mouth, but it stays there. It doesn't leak out, so it's fine. It's the same. Oh, yeah, it's highly toxic. Oh, yeah, we put it in your food utensils, but we seal it, so it's fine. So there's I can't remember what's her name, Lead-Free Mum or something like that. There's a great lady whose sons both had lead poisoning, young twin boys from what I remember. And so she got really into the subject. And I mention it because she does extensive testing of all kinds of things to see their lead levels. And often it's shocking what she shows. Salt is one example, for instance. A lot of salts out there have a lot of lead in them. She tested a lot of them. But she's testing like thousands of different things for lead. So if you want to go down the rabbit hole of what actually has lead in, her website is a great resource.
Thank you for that great resource on lead. I'm sure, I'll look it up. I didn't know that was out there, so thank you for that. So you also did mention arsenic. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, and that one's pretty common. I have seen that before. And so the issue of arsenic tends to be rice is a big one. So in the same way that mercury is commonly in seawater and therefore in fish, arsenic commonly gets into water that they use to grow plants. And so, of course, all plants require water, but rice literally grows in a pool of water. And so that's why it absorbs more arsenic. So people who eat a lot of rice, they tend to be more susceptible to arsenic poisoning. It isn't other stuff, though. I was just looking at a list earlier, like fruit juices, processed fruit juices. Arsenic has been found in commonly. Baby food, baby formula. It's one of the things that actually all the heavy metals I've talked about so far have been found in. So, so there are certain natural foods that's found in that I've just listed, like fish and rice. But usually it's processed food that you're going to find in. Because in the process of processing, it gets contaminated, right? So generally, if you eat whole foods, other than the ones that I've just mentioned, your chances of significant heavy metal exposure are actually, fairly low, reasonably low. And it often comes from other environmental stuff like I talked about. So in the case of lead, just to go back for a second, so other than lead pipes, there is some food that it is definitely found in. And then the paint thing, you might be like, well, I'm not eating paint. Yes, but you might be breathing it in, So once paint starts to flake, or even, when your plate chips, the plate that's full of lead or whatever, that can be a factor. And, it can be in water as well. So, I didn't mention this earlier, but I want to mention this briefly now, actually, Krissy. So when it comes to exposure, just for mold, the other thing that I do recommend is an air purifier, a good air purifier. Especially if you're in a house that you can't fully deal with the problem straight away and you can't leave. And as I said, there's no point detoxing if you haven't dealt with the exposure. But that's not quite true if especially if it's a small place, like you just got a living room and a bedroom, for instance. You could put a high quality air purifier in both of those rooms, have it running 24/7, and that will massively reduce your exposure. It has to be a good quality one that can actually filter out mycotoxins, but they do exist.
I was going to say, do you have any recommendations? Are there certain things, like is it HEPA filter? Is it something like that, or any other distinctions for that?
It's definitely not HEPA, although yes, but that's not enough. They will say that they can filter out mycotoxins. There are a few of them. If you remind me after, I'll find a brand that I already researched that does the job for me. And I just leave it running anyway, even though we're in this house now, because it filters out basically everything bad. I mean, it filters out viruses. Why not, right? In fact, I have it in the room. We have most of our pets in one room, so I have it in there all the time because it's, sucking up whatever stuff they're releasing to the environment. But anyway, so back to the heavy metals thing. Most heavy metals are not breathed in, to be fair, but lead is one exception to that. So again, that would be dealt with a good quality air purifier.
How common is heavy metal poisoning?
That's a great question. Probably not. So that really depends on the definition. So if we go by a World Health Organization definition, and if you are in a, what do they call them these days, developed country, and you are not working in industry that deals with heavy metals, then it is relatively unusual. But that is by the World Health Organization standards. So let's use lead as an example because it's the one that I ended up finding out the most about. Although mercury is more common, so I will talk about that one too. The allowable level from a World Health Organization point of view before it becomes what they consider dangerous is 45 micrograms per deciliter. There's actually quite a lot. Sorry, and that's for the blood. That's actually quite a lot. That's more than some nutrients like selenium and, there's like various essential nutrients that they actually test fairly commonly that you'll have more lead than that. But they think that's fine. For children, it's only 5. So that's a big distinction. And that's because lead's an interesting one. It kind of works differently from the other poisons. It doesn't work so much by damaging. So with everything else, it has like a corrosive, destructive kind of impact on the cell. With lead, the issue of it is more, it's like a zombie molecule. So the body can't tell the difference between a lead and calcium, for instance, very well, or hardly at all. And calcium is essential for every cell in the body. And so if you have a lot of lead, your body will start using the lead instead of the calcium. True for zinc and other stuff, but calcium is particularly important. And then the cell won't work. And so and if you have a lot of cells not working, cells are often, in a line of communication. This can be a real issue. And it's a particularly issue for a growing child. So the growing child who's growing their brain and growing their body is growing it out of lead. It can cause a lot of behavioral issues. They can have their growth stunted. They can have their IQ significantly stunted, which is the number one biggest predictor of success and even health throughout a person's lifetime. So this is like ruining a person, really. If it happens when you're young, I would say it's as ruinous as severe trauma and abuse. I mean, possibly even more so, because you can maybe overcome that, whereas you can't overcome a low IQ. So it's really, really terrible. So that safe level, as I say, is a lot higher in children. The amount that you can have before it's dangerous is a lot higher in adults than it is in children. So, I mean, other than inside the cell, which most people don't know, like when most people think of calcium, where does it accumulate, Krissy?
Bones.
Yes, and the teeth, right, which are an extension of the bones. And so when they studied fossil records of ancient people, right, they can actually see how much lead is accumulated. And in, prehistoric people, so pre-civilization, it's almost nothing. So this is the challenge. Throughout the vast majority of our history and evolution, we had almost no lead that we had to deal with, I know famously, like in Rome, right, they had high levels of lead because they used lead pipes and stuff like that. But still, vast majority of our ancestors, for the vast majority of the time, had exposure to almost no lead. So the kind of reference range in the test that I showed when I showed the test thing was like up to, 3 point something micrograms per deciliter. But really anything more than 1 microgram per deciliter is not good. So when you asked earlier, how common is the toxicity? You see, it depends totally on what we classify as toxicity. If we say above the WHO level, not many in developed countries in general. If we say above the reference range used by, for instance, the company I use, then a few, right? Maybe around 5% by definition. That's how they create the reference range, I believe. But if we talk about, so I think, only 5% of people are over that 3 point something level that I was at 27 at, and still I'm at 6 at. So I'm still on the top, 3%. Hooray. But the if we're talking about above optimal, 1. It shouldn't really be above 1. It shouldn't even really be above 0.1, although that probably never happens in our modern world. So we could say almost no one has heavy metal toxicity, or we could say pretty much everyone has heavy metal toxicity, depending on what standard we use. Do we use the standard of so bad you might die any minute? Not many. Or do we use the standard of way more than we used to based on our evolutionary history, and then it's everyone? And so you can choose your own, answer from within that range. I would say, everyone, but it all depends if it's debilitating, I guess. Is it impacting the quality of your life? But that's not a simple one to answer. As we talked about in the cardiovascular episode, the damaging effect of certain very nasty toxins, exactly like heavy metals, like lead, may be the thing that are accumulating to the micro tears in the lining of the arteries and the accumulation of platelets and clotting factors to excessive levels and arterial plaque to excessive levels. So it could be a thing that is no big deal. It could be one of the main causes of the number one thing that kills us in the modern age. I'm not going to stake my flag in either of those for definite because I don't know for sure, but it's somewhere in that range. And my opinion is it's more on the causing a lot of problem for a lot of people end of the range.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that makes sense, especially if, what you were saying too is the getting it, confused with there's not a big distinction between the lead and the calcium, and then your body is using something that is not designed for that purpose at all and causing so much more havoc internally. So I just wanted to ask, because this is where I'm going to go with that, what would or how would these, I guess the signs, the symptoms, or these things present in an individual's body so that they might think, oh, well, maybe I might have this?
Yeah, it's a good question. So again, because all of them kind of ruin everything, it is hard to say. With mercury, it's kind of famous for creating, again, like with mycotoxins, and they are often, practitioners often struggle to work out which it is. They're often confused with each other, is neurological issues. This is where the term comes from, the Mad Hatter. Because people used to make hats. Hats used to be a big deal, right, for men up until recently. And the people who used to make them with lead. And so a lot of the times those people would go crazy. That statement is well-known folklore. What's more controversial to say is one of the other careers of people who have to deal with mercury a lot is dentists. They're obviously wearing gloves and stuff when they're touching it, but a lot of them are breathing it in. So mercury absolutely can come in through respiration as well as ingestion, just like we talked about before. So breathing in a lot of mercury vapor over a long period of time. I believe dentists have one of the highest suicide rates of any profession. That certainly was the case when I looked. But that might have been over 10 years ago. I don't know if it's still the case, but it's potentially a significant issue. Lead, obviously, anyone dealing with guns, firing guns specifically, they're going to be breathing in a lot of lead. And, you know, whereas the classic sign of mercury toxicity is madness, one of the classic signs of lead poisoning is aggressiveness. So, you know, in children, it might be classified as, you know, oppositional defiance disorder or ADD and stuff like that. And maybe they have those issues, and it's nothing to do with any toxin. But when I hear of people who have children with those issues, I'm like, yeah, test them for lead, right? If they're super aggressive, it can be an indicator. Funnily enough, if they like to listen to a lot of heavy metal music, they may have heavy metal poisoning. No, that's a joke. But, you know, if they have that aggressive tendency, then I look more at lead. I don't know of anything behavioral like that for the other two, but those are the two that I'm aware of. So, I mean, other than that, okay. So for lead, you know, again, it's different for children from adults. So with children, it's these kind of growing issues, developmental issues, especially they don't seem to be keeping up learning wise and behavioral wise. Of course, there is lots of speculation that autism is related to mercury toxicity and other heavy metals, heavily disputed because of the organizations involved and all that. I can't claim to be expert in this. I'd like to, at some point, have someone who is and interview them. But again, I noticed at the time we're filming this, there's a presidential candidate talking about this, very interestingly, in the US over there, who is not talking about it from a position of ignorance, but from a position of having bringing lawsuits against the companies doing this poisoning for 4 decades, as well as the governmental bodies that seem to be allowing it for whatever reason. So, yeah, I would say in children, it's significant in terms of their growth and development. Now, in terms of adults, it's more the usual stuff, you know, so fatigue, anxiety, not being able to sleep, you know, thyroid function, immune system not functioning properly, inflammation. But again, because it affects the mitochondria, it can show up anywhere. That's the simple answer, right? So it's kind of tricky. And it is this nebulousness of symptoms that is one of the reasons why the mainstream medical and scientific establishment is so averse to it, because it's not easy to put it into a box, right? It's anything like that has such impacts, such widespread impacts, they are less likely to want to have a look at. So I'm sure people have compiled this before. Again, remind me and I'll give you links, but it will be pages and pages of everything under the sun, basically, is what I remember for all of these.
And then if somebody does suspect it, and I mean, I know we talk about testing and taking a look inside, then what would you recommend as far as what test would be the best? I mean, again, I know you mentioned urine for the mycotoxin tests and the mold tests. You know, what would your recommendations be here?
That's a good question. So blood I like the most, and hair I like the least. However, blood is the most expensive and inconvenient, and hair is the cheapest and convenient. So the benefit of hair testing, as I said, it's cheap, it's easy, and that's really it. Disadvantage of it is when you have your hair tested, and if you have heavy metals in it, you never quite know, is that because my body is excreting it through the hair, or is it because I've been bathing in it, right? If I'm bathing in water full of lead or mercury or whatever, then it's, for whatever reason, it's going to be in my hair. Doesn't mean it's necessarily in my body. So that's why hair is the least reliable to me. Although if you can't afford anything else and you just want some indication that you might have an issue with it somewhere, it's a good start. In terms of which is better for which, with mercury, the blood test and urine test each point to a specific type of mercury toxicity. One shows up for blood, and one shows up for urine. Sorry, with the two different sources. One will show up dental source, and one will show up more a food source. The person who does that test and also does hair is Quicksilver Scientific. They call it the mercury tri-test. They are the world's leaders in mercury detoxification specifically. So I'm happy to recommend them in that regard. They treated Tony Robbins when he had his mercury toxicity, and I've worked with a lot of, well-known people as well as common people like myself. Although they weren't really able to help much with lead. Lead is a bit of an exception. For the reason we talked about, your body doesn't recognize it as a poison. With all the other heavy metals, your body recognizes it as a poison, it just can't deal with it, with like mercury. But with lead, it doesn't recognize it as a poison. So it's a bit of a different situation. Anyway, so their test is probably what I'd recommend for mercury if you have enough money, but I think it's fairly expensive just for one heavy metals. So that's more of your fairly certain, or if you have enough money to put into, just seeing kind of situation. I quite like, there's another company called ZRT that does a much more broad heavy metal and essential mineral test, I think for around the same price as just the mercury test. And they'll do a combination of blood and urine, not hair. And they have like a lot of documentation and research to back up their choice for each. I think for some they do both. They might even do both for mercury. I can't remember. But for some minerals, they do both. They stopped doing lead, though, annoyingly. I had an argument with them about it because it said it on the website in England, and then I spent ages waiting for the results, and it wasn't included in there. But I'll recommend them despite that false advertising, because I think overall it's still the best value for money and accuracy broad spectrum heavy metal test that I have come across, especially in the US for my US people. So yeah, those, and then I talked about the NutrEval before in the testing episode, and so for that one, I would say that's a really good one if you're doing a general test, because it includes the 4 top heavy metals in terms of blood, which is the most important. That's how I found out about my lead toxicity, and doing the other type of test didn't reveal anything specifically more other than bromine, which is a halogen, not a heavy metal, but also a toxic element. Maybe we'll talk about another time. But so yeah, those would be my favorite tests.
Oh, perfect. Thank you for that. And I know when we discuss the NutrEval, it's trying to figure out resources too. It's like the NutrEval is great for a very, very big overview and gives you a lot of insights to many, many things. And if you're wanting more of those specific things, in the Quicksilver and the ZRT are really helpful with those as well.
Yes.
Perfect. And then, so, I mean, what I know is when I hear a lot about heavy metal poisoning, then like chelation comes up a lot. But I wanted to ask you, like, what would be the way to get rid of these heavy metals? Is it chelation? Is it something else? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. So let's go back to the model I said earlier of agitate, process, and remove, right? So that absolutely applies to the heavy metals as well. And so when we talk about chelation, what we're mainly talking about is it's part of that first process. So it's something that agitates and then binds to it while it's in the blood so that it can get to the kidneys or the liver and cause as little damage as possible along the way. Often the artificial chelators that are given, like EDTA is the most famous one, that's done often by blood transfusion, although there is an oral version of it as well. That's what it does. It goes in there, it binds to the heavy metal that's already in the blood, and then helps the liver and especially kidneys to tag it and remove it. I say tag it, like identify it and remove it. So chelators generally act as agitators, from my definition earlier. And so yes, they will be kind of mopping up what's in the blood to some degree based on what I just said, but they will absolutely also be pulling it like magnets out of storage. And so if you're going to do chelation, often it's a good idea to do it under supervision, because you don't want to be overloaded on it. And generally that is how it's offered, to be fair, like in a clinic or something like that. There is a challenge with chelation, and it is that just as your body can't tell the difference between, say, lead and calcium, EDTA can't tell the difference between lead and calcium. So, or magnesium, or zinc, or iron, or a bunch of other stuff. So, and as I said, I kind of assumed, without knowing, that we had like so much more of those things than we would have things like lead and mercury. It's not actually the case. You're going to have more calcium than lead, but you might have just as much lead as, molybdenum or selenium or one of the other important trace nutrients, manganese maybe. I can't remember off the top of my head, but they're not that different, right? And so if you're sucking out all the lead, you're also going to suck out all of that. And you're not going to be given enough EDTA to do that, because that would be dangerous. But even if you're sucking out 10%, then you're going to be sucking out 10% of that essential nutrient, which can be a problem. So that's the danger of EDTA. A lot of people, when they do it, they say they feel exhausted, they feel washed out, they feel not good. And this is why. Is it a good idea in some cases? Yes, right? If your level of toxicity has got too bad and you need to get it out, then you need to get it out. This is what I said before about, I think in the previous episode about colonics and enemas. Is it a great idea to be disrupting that internal environment and flushing out good bacteria? No, it's not. But would we do it anyway in some cases, because the environment in there has got so toxic that you just got to get rid of some of the good to get rid of the bad? Yes. And so it's the same situation with chelation as well, I would say. It can be called for. But I would prefer in many cases to, if it is not an emergency, to do more what I talked about earlier. So agitate, give your body the building blocks to create its own chelators, which is often just proteins, amino acids, often a diet that's insufficient in protein, or if there's not enough protein absorption, that certainly makes the process more difficult. And then various minerals as well, right? So zinc is a commonly talked about one, important one, which helps to get heavy metals out of the body. There is, magnesium is another one. Some of the B vitamins, as always, they're always good. So they're part of that process of getting these things out. And I would focus more on awareness of that cycle I talked about in the detox episode, because yes, some of it will come out via the kidneys, but a significant amount will still come out via the liver, via the bile. And so when that whole process gets stuck, that is usually the area it has problems. In some cases, the primary route of detoxification actually is the kidneys. But even in that case, you got to ask yourself, what does it do to have the liver above capacity? So when the liver is above capacity, as I talked about in the detox episode, your body often kicks the toxins to the secondary backup system, which is the kidneys. So one of the reasons why you may be building up a level of a toxin that your kidneys should be able to deal with is because your liver is overloaded or just blocked, not completely blocked, but partially blocked, more blocked than you would like it, which is not at all. And so the toxins are going back into the bloodstream to be filtered by the kidneys. The kidneys dealing with all this stuff that it isn't really meant to be dealing with on an everyday basis, and then it can't properly deal with the things that it is meant to be dealing with, that it is meant to be specializing in. So even if the specific toxin that you've got an issue with, the liver is not the primary way of dealing with it, when you get the liver flowing and working correctly, like we talk about in that episode, and you're binding the toxins to stop them being reabsorbed again and transport them out of the body, then it means that all the other systems, like the lymph and the kidneys, can work better.
Fantastic. That really does set us up for moving towards more optimization of making sure that those pathways are moving well, that we're providing those things and able to open it up, because it doesn't help us if we've just are creating more of a backlog and we can't get rid of these things. We're just going to feel horrible by the end of it.
Absolutely.
So is there any way that we can prevent this? Prevent our exposure, prevent having these heavy metals around where they're going to damage us?
Good question. Totally, it's extremely difficult. But again, let's just look at how they come in, right? They come in through inhalation. So they can come in through the lungs, they can come in through the skin, or they can come in through the mouth. That's basically how they're going to come in. And so those are things you want to be aware of. How clean is the air I breathe? It is absolutely true. If you're in a pristine, natural environment with barely any people around up in the high in the mountain, you will be breathing in less heavy metals than someone who lives next to an industrial plant that is spewing out chemicals, right? And you also do better than someone who has to be in traffic 2 hours every day, breathing in fumes from cars. Now, since they removed lead from car fuel in the 80s, that is not as much of an issue, but there's still a lot of not great stuff in there. So making your air as pure as possible. If you can't afford to live in the middle of nowhere, for whatever reason, can't afford money-wise, but you have to be near someone or whatever, then artificially cleaning your air as much as possible is really beneficial. Everyone focuses so much on food, and that's because, traditionally you were much more likely to be poisoned by food than the air you breathed throughout most of our history, because, food easily would rot without fridges, et cetera, et cetera. But in this day and age, a lot of our toxicity actually comes in through our lungs, and we have no idea. Actually had a great, like a mainstream medical doctor talk about this just the other day. I was really surprised, who generally had a lot of mainstream opinions, and he goes, the amount of toxicity that we're breathing in every day is shockingly bad. And I was like, wow, okay. So I'm glad that that's filtering even to that level these days. But again, they're more like, there's not a lot you can do about it. I would disagree. If you can't optimize your environment as I say, moving, then second best absolutely is getting a good purifier for your home, for your bedroom, for your office, and even for your car, so that it's processing those fumes, right, and reducing those as much as possible. I don't think wearing a mask if you're out in traffic really makes very much difference. But I think whenever you're in a contained environment, as most of us are most of the time, filter it. So that's the lungs. The skin, unless you're like bathing in lakes and sea regularly, which again most people aren't, the vast majority of toxins that come in through the skin are voluntary, and it's usually cosmetic stroke cleaning products. I don't know how to put it. Skin moisturizers, shampoos, all of that stuff, makeup, and then the other thing is cleaning stuff, right? If you're cleaning. So get the, and then even if you're like, I haven't done a day's cleaning in my life, Owen, still, if you are exposed to that, right? So, if your clothes, for instance, are all washed in, fairly toxic washing liquid or powder, detergent, thank you, then you're still going to be exposed to that. Ditto, like I never, ever, ever wear cotton unless it's organic or very secondhand, because they just load that full of pesticides. It's just full of toxins. I wear hemp, I wear silk, although rarely, but this is silk, I think. I wear organic cotton, although not even that much. Linen. I mean, that's it. Wear, bed, clothing, bedspread, like everything. I'm just not touching cotton, and I'm not touching polyester and all that stuff for different reasons. I won't go into all of that, but just, do you have to be crazy about it? No. You may think, well, I just said it's crazy, but to me, when I used to be very poor, I would buy these things secondhand, right? Oh, wool. That's the other one I didn't mention, right? Go and get a wool jumper from like a charity shop sweater for like, $4 or $5, right? It's been washed many times before, so it hasn't still got all the poisons that it originally had. that's fine, right? If you got a bit more money, then instead of buying yourself a Gucci or whatever, go and buy yourself, a nice hemp or silk item of clothing, right? It's way, way, way less toxic. Makeup, there is safe versions of makeup. There's safe versions of everything these days. This is not like it was 30 years ago where like everything was toxic and tough luck. These days there are safe versions of everything that touches your skin. You just got to look for them and prioritize it. And then lastly, food. This is the one I'll talk about least because you've probably heard everyone talk about it the most. But organic, where possible, there's that dirty dozen, right, that you mentioned recently, Krissy. Maybe we can give them that of, if you can't afford all organic food, then make sure you at least avoid the worst non-organic food. I would say if you can't afford all organic, then prioritize if you eat animal foods, make sure at least they're organic, because meat, animals tend to concentrate nutrition and toxicity. So, I might eat a non-organic vegetable, but I would not eat a non-organic piece of meat. Maybe if it's 100% grass-fed and, I know the farm and all that, but not a normal animal that's been fed all kinds of God knows what and pumped full of God knows what. No way. Never. No, not under any circumstances, no matter how hungry I am. That's just a line I have that I don't think I've ever crossed. So that's my choice. Obviously, you can make a different choice. I'm just giving you examples. And processed food, right? Same thing. Is it in a package? I am always amazed still. People say that I'm like autistic because of this, but how many people buy a packaged food and do not look at the ingredients? I just cannot comprehend it. Even before, when I was like in my early 20s and I was smoking 30 cigarettes a day, I think I still checked the packages just because I wanted to know what it was, even when I didn't care about health. Like now I never dream about, eating something from a package and not knowing what every ingredient is and if it's something I want in my body. To me, it's crazy. I understand people like, I don't have the time for that. These people who spend time on social media and all the rest of it. Like, if you're genuinely busy, constantly working, looking after people, fine.
Like you said, there are plenty of options today, for the more health conscious in that regard. Absolutely.
Yes. And that's in terms of looking at packets. And of course, the ideal thing is don't eat anything from a packet unless it's, I don't know, a single ingredient packet, right? Like just a packet full of oats or something like that. But, eat simply, I think, is a simple answer. A lot of the reason why we don't eat healthily is just because our food would be too boring. We'll talk about this in a different episode, like the poisons that are naturally in certain foods. So we won't get into that here. We're planning that one soon, though. I know we've already done the outline for it. But yeah, so simple stuff. Don't eat it unless you know what all the ingredients are and you know that you want them. Try not to eat it if it's not organic, or at least, if you know the source, if it's 100% grass-fed or whatever. And then with water, almost missed that. Like, I tend to not drink any liquids other than water, tea sometimes. That's pretty much it. Where's your water coming from, right? What kind of water is it? Test your water. It's a one-off cost. It's probably a couple of $100, something like that, especially if you own a house, so you plan to be there for a long time. $200, it'll tell you, does it have lead? Does it have this? It'll tell you the different minerals. It'll tell you pretty much everything. It'll tell you everything that you need to know for not that much money, given how important the information is. And then you can choose. Am I willing to live with drinking that water? And when I say drinking, it's not just you're literally putting in a glass and drinking it. It's what you're making tea out of, what you're making pasta out of. And again, what you're bathing in, because we talked, you absorb things. If you've got steam, you're breathing it in. Like chlorine is not great. Again, not heavy metal, so we haven't talked about it, but it's another toxic element that you take in way more from breathing it in than you do drinking. So like a shower, you're taking so much more from a 10-minute shower than you would, drinking it all day for weeks on end. So it's really important to know what water it is you're actually dealing with, because not just for drinking it, but for everything else that you use it for, that you end up taking it in. And then you can decide, is it okay? I mean, I was actually surprised when I tested our water here. It's not that bad. It's still not good enough by my standard, but if someone else showed me those results and said, is that okay? I really can't afford to fix it. I'd say, sure, it's actually okay. But sometimes they're really not. They're really horrific, right? And you want to know that. Maybe if you can't afford a filter, you buy the cheapest possible bottled water. Although that's plastic, so that's not ideal, but you got to weigh that up against, what's in your tap water, as I say. Maybe get the simplest filter, right? The cheapest filter. They're not great, but they'll at least remove most of the chlorine and some of the other stuff, so they're better than nothing. And then ideally get yourself a great filter, at least for your drinking water. You can get like a fantastic quality filter for $1,000, something like that, so that your drinking water at least is completely pure. I'd say drinking water only because filtering enough water to feed every tap in the house tends to cost quite a lot of money, at least a few $1,000. But to just have, enough, when I say drinking water, I mean, enough for cooking pasta, enough for making soup, enough for making tea, enough for everything, anything that you would consume. That's possible. So yeah, those are the main ways that toxins go in. Oh, and then I guess the last one is be careful who you let inject what into your body, and I'll leave that at that.
It's a great point. It's a great point to finish on. I know we're pretty much at time. I know we did want to look at one other, so we'll have to do that on another episode. But this has been extremely helpful. And just in this last closing, Elwin, are there any other final thoughts on the things that we've discussed today?
Yeah, just the usual, really. Please share your experience. Have you had to deal with any of the things I've talked about today? If so, what was it like? What were your symptoms? And if so, what worked for you?
Wonderful. And thank you everyone who joined us today. Please remember to hit the subscribe button and make sure you put your comments down below. Let us know what you want to hear. Let us dive deeper into certain subjects for you. We really do enjoy being able to bring this information to you to empower you in your health to wellness and vitality and optimization. So thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time. Take care. I hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you did, I want to tell you about a way that you can support the podcast while also getting great deals on high quality supplements that Elwin and I personally use, and that's Feel Younger. What I love about Feel Younger is that they have great quality products with minimal fillers at a very affordable price. You can call their customer support team 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, and in my experience, they're very helpful and friendly. And the thing I love most of all is the amazing descriptions that Elwin has written about each product category on that topic. And each product has so much education on it that I've actually learned more from reading the descriptions than I have from a lot of articles. So to support the podcast, please use Feel Younger for all your supplement needs. And to let them know we sent you, use promo code RejuvenateMe for 20% off your first order at feelyounger.net. That's 20% off your first order using promo code RejuvenateMe at feelyounger.net.